Good morning, everyone. So my name is Robyne, and I'm very excited to talk to you a wee bit about my research program. But I have to tell you what just happened. Like, Peter just blew my mind. And I'm having this moment in the back, and I actually take a picture and I text it to my son, who is in class. But I'm like, oh my gosh, this is happening. And his response is, oh my gosh, Mom, you're at a talent show and you don't have a talent. What are you doing? Like, run, like, Mom, get out fast, like Uber, Lyft, like, Mom, you have no talent. So Peter and Ron this morning, that's a beautiful, thank you so much to Martin and Fair and their wonderful team and everybody who put this together. What I want to do in the next 20 minutes is walk you through a wee bit of a snapshot on my work on resiliency and try to convince my 15-year-old son in Peterborough that his mother does have a talent, which is being able to translate research. So hold on tight and we'll go through this. So I'm from Trent University. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with Trent. Are there any Trent grads, maybe? They have one. Oh, yes, we probably know each other. I actually do know you. It's Carly McPherson. That is phenomenal. That's how small my university is that I pointed out Carly in the class. Oh my goodness. We're just going to take a moment and just kind of regroup and recalibrate, and that's part of what resiliency is all about. Okay, so my institution where I work and some of where this research has happened, the land in which I work upon and the land in which I teach upon and live upon is land of the Anishinaabe First Persons of Mississauga. And I honor that I'm a settler in that space, and I'm also a visitor in this territory today. So I thank people for making space for us to be able to join and have conversations. Miigwech. So let's just jump right in because we're on a wee bit of a tight shot clock up here at the front, and I promised Martin I would make sure to do this in a short time frame. My research program started about 2 decades ago, and I was really curious about what people wish for. What do people want and what people are aspiring for? And I never expected the journey that my research was going to take me on and what we came upon. And what was so fascinating, what we came upon when we talked to people from all around the world, asking them what they wish for, what are they hoping for, we came upon this universal fate, this piece that everybody had in common. And what they wanted to be was they wanted to feel okay. And that actually goes against a lot of the information that we hear in a lot of other places where we're told we're supposed to be extraordinary. We're supposed to be the best at everything. Everything is supposed to be leveled up, and everybody is supposed to be doing enormous amounts of work in lots of different life areas. And even if you think, for example, of your extracurricular time, like time when you're turned off and you're away from work or away from different types of responsibilities, even that time has become hyper-competitive. In those windows of time, we're supposed to be raising money for charity, which is great, but usually we should be running and then posting about it so people know even our spare time is productive. We never actually get a break, which makes being okay extremely hard when we live in this ecosystem. So my work looks at how do we get people to be okay, and more importantly, how do we get people to feel okay in times of stress, challenge, change, grief, trauma, restructure, whatever stressor we throw at people, how do we make sure that they're okay on the other side of it? And one of the things that we think about is that I think a really important question that we have to ask about this research, and when we think about resiliency, is there a biological difference between people who are able to get up after a setback versus people who give up? Is there something in our DNA that sets some people up for success and others at a detriment? And what the research says is there's no difference. There is nothing in your DNA, in your bones, in your makeup that is going to make it so you can or cannot experience difficulty. What it comes down to is the way that you approach it, the way that you interact with it. Why this is important when you're working with your groups, we can teach this to people. We can teach people how to navigate stress and challenge and change. That's something that's extremely important. And before I go too far in the theory that my team and I work with, I think it's important to have some awareness pauses, because I don't think any piece of research is going to solve every single dilemma and issue. And one of the awareness pauses I have that I've come upon in my work with resiliency is a part that I'm concerned about, given the fact that as a species, we're hardwired for struggle. We're supposed to go through hard times. We're supposed to be challenged. Life is meant to have bumps and bruises. We will not be changed if we're not challenged. So all of the good growth, all of the best things that you actually discover about yourself, we don't discover them in easy times. We don't discover them when there's no struggle. If there's no struggle, the reward doesn't actually feel good. And what's happening right now, and we see this in education, we talked about this about 10 years ago. We used to see this phenomena that was called the helicopter parent. Do you guys remember that concept where the child goes out into the world and the parents and the supporter would like hover around and swoop in when called upon? Do you guys remember that concept? Yes? We have a new type of parent on the loose that we see in education, and we respectfully call it the snowplow parent. And when I'm working with folks in the South, we call it the lawnmower parent, because you can't really explain to somebody in like San Diego what a snowplow does, so we call it a lawnmower, because we want to make sure we're meeting our audience. And what's happening there, instead of like the helicopter parent who let people have setbacks, who let them struggle, have those like bumps and bruises, preventing trauma, what's happening now is family systems and supporters and even employers are getting out ahead of people and paving perfect pathways so they don't know about the struggle, they don't know about the challenge, and then they come into adulthood and they don't know how to think on their feet because they haven't learned the skills that we need when you're a wee one to be able to learn how to think on your feet as you age. And I had a parent, I'll give you an example, I had a parent who reached out to me on Twitter and said, I need some help, I'm really worried about my child, I think he's gonna get cut from this rep team, can you talk to me? So I was like, absolutely, and I talked to this dad and I gave him all of my sport gems about the importance of setback. And then there was a long pause and the father said, do you think if I sponsor the team, they'll give him a spot, right? So that's what we're dealing with, people that don't know how to think on their feet and get bumps and bruises. So we need to kind of change that paradigm. And the second one that I'm mindful of is I hear people tell me all the time that they want to get rid of their problems. But one of the things that we know about psychology is that we're natural born problem solvers. So when you get rid of your problem and you come upon a solution, the first thing you're going to do is then go find a new problem to have. Right? We're always looking for more problems. So essentially the idea is we have to pick problems that we like because we're always going to have problems. It's not realistic to think that we can ever get problem free. It goes against our DNA. But this is what we do know, and I'll talk to you about a couple of these. My research has uncovered that there are 5 core competencies that we see that actually support people's capacity for resiliency. And when you see this list, what I really hope you see is that there's nothing about ableism, gender, IQ, socioeconomic status, background experience. None of those things hold predictive qualities about resiliency. We see these pieces. And I'll walk you through just a couple of them. I don't have time to go too deep on all of them, but I'll give you a brief overview. The first one is a sense of belonging. The most important thing that people need, whether it be in your family systems, your organizations, your companies, is to feel as though they belong somewhere. And I remember working as a student in Kingston Penitentiary, and I was talking to one inmate, and he was in my office, and he was 40 years old, and when I was flipping through the file, I realized he had been within this incarceral state since he was essentially 18. He had lived longer in prison than he lived on the outside. And I asked him, how did you get here? What is your story? And he shared with me that when he grew up, he kind of got bounced around, didn't really feel like he belonged anywhere. Until at 17, he was actively recruited by a local gang, and he finally had a sense of belonging. He finally felt like he belonged somewhere and somebody cared about him. And he said to me, he goes, Robyne, all I had to do was kill those 2 people, and I had a family for the rest of my life. This is what I've always needed. Our need to belong is significant. Now, the second one we talk about is this idea about perspective. And perspective is this idea about we're willing to have what I like to call mental nimbleness. And what I mean by that is a lot of the thinking that we see with people is something that we call brittle thinking. It's one way of thinking. I hear things like, this is how we do it, this is the way we've always done it, and I hear this kind of repetitive behavior. And one of the things that I think about is if you don't repair it, you're going to repeat it. Right? So if you don't repair something, you know it's likely you will repeat that type of behavior. So I encourage people to think about nimble thinking, bendable thinking, malleable thinking. And I can share you a little narrative of how we got here. So in the province of Ontario, we have an event in the fall in elementary school that's called cross-country running. Have people heard of it? Yeah? Yeah, so I think what happens is it goes something like this. The school board decides this is going to be the day, and then the teachers put children on buses and take them to the woods with no training and give them ribbons as they make it out of the forest, right? Like, I don't think it's really well mapped out in elementary school. When you get to high school, it's actually an event, it's a sport, but elementary school, it's a wee bit of a Wild West. And one year, I went to my daughter, unfortunately I was teaching and I couldn't come to her run, and so I picked her up at the end of the day and I got there and she was crying and she was very upset. And I'm like, girl, what's the matter? And she said, Mom, I was humiliated today at cross-country running. And humiliation is the emotion that we worry about with our children, but also our colleagues and our employees and people we work with. Humiliation is the first stepping stone towards trauma. We don't worry about anger and frustration. We worry about trauma that comes with this notion of humiliation. So as I was holding my daughter, the only thing that I thought I could say to comfort her was this: it won't go on your resume. For some reason, I just felt like if she knew this would not go on her resume, then that would like maybe mitigate any of the damage that was happening. And my little 11-year-old at the time looked at me and said, "This is not helping." And I was like, okay, well, and I said, Ava, I don't know what to say. I'm like, what happened? She goes, Mom, it was humiliating. She goes, I came second. So all of a sudden, I literally armbarred that little girl out. And I'm like, what's the matter with you? Like, I teach perspective. Like, you have none, right? Like, second is fine. And she said, Mom, I totally have perspective. I was the winner of losers. And I literally was like, oh my gosh, what happened, right? It wasn't organic carrots. Like, in my head, I was thinking of all the baby food and all of the things that I had done wrong. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Calendar year later rolls down, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it's cross country again. Like, they don't even tell you. It literally just happens. And then she said, are you going to come watch, Mom? Because you need to come because I'm going to win today. And I was like, oh, dear Lord, I forgot you have no perspective, and I haven't fixed that yet. So I actually looked at her and I'm like, I got to teach. I'm so sorry. And that felt like a bright blessing because I didn't want to be there to watch my daughter knock children out of the way, right? So that actually felt like the universe was giving this working mom a break. And I got there out of the day, and this time she was smiling and she was beaming and she was so excited. And I said, Ava, like, what happened today? And she goes, Mom, today was the best day of my life so far. She's like, I came last and it felt so good. So if you're ever wondering, do psychology people know what we're doing with our children? We have no clue either, right? Like we are just swinging at the fences as well, but not knowing. And I said, tell me about what happened. And Ava explained to me that at this particular event, the teacher asked them to do 2 huge laps of this area. And my daughter was so confident, she wanted to win so bad, she ran so hard that she actually passed some of the other runners just because she actually was going so fast. And one of those little girls in the back group who happens to have special needs, as my daughter was running by, the little girl reached for my daughter's arm and said, Ava, do you want to run with me because I'm feeling a little bit scared? And Ava said, Mom, I ran with her because I didn't want her to come last. I'm bawling, like bawling my eyes out. And she's like, did I do that wrong? Like, what's the matter with you? And I'm like, no, girl, that's perspective. Perspective is when you can be focused, hungry, disciplined, going after your goals, but when called upon, you're able to take in information that's coming in from other sources and change your behavior on the fly. It's when you walk into the office and you see a colleague who's clearly struggling, instead of like avoiding eye contact and going the other way, you actually turn in and you lean in and you say, I see that you're hurting right now. What can I do? What can I carry for you? It's showing up when we're called upon. Now, I'll just jump through another one because this one's real close to my heart as well, is the notion of hope and being hope-filled. Part of our research has identified that it's crucial that people have this idea of hope fostered. And I remember talking to a group of soldiers who had recently come back from a tour of duty. And I was looking at this soldier group and I was talking to these 10 soldiers, and what I was curious about is what their tomorrow looked like. When all of a sudden soldiers are leaving the base after a tour, I want to make sure that they're okay. So I asked the first soldier, I said, what does tomorrow look like for you? And the soldier said to me, tomorrow I'm actually, don't worry about me, Doc. He said, tomorrow I'm just going to my house and I'm going to paint my kitchen, because before I left for my deployment, I only painted half my kitchen. And I'm like, oh, okay, that felt good. You had somewhere to go. I spoke to the second military member, and he told me that before he left for his deployment, before he left, he had laid down hardwood floor, but he only got half of it done. So tomorrow he was going to lay down hardwood floor. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And after I spoke to all of them, all of a sudden the lieutenant came into the room and we were chit-chatting, and he's like, okay, what do you think about these boys? And I said, I think they're all good, but I'm really curious. What's the likelihood that they all have major house renovation projects tomorrow? And he took this weathered breath, and it's not very often in research do we ever come upon a truth. And in this moment, I felt that I saw a truth when that weathered man and I had this conversation, and I said to him, I said, sir, what's that about? He said, my guess is that they've left those as signs of hope for their families that they're coming home to finish them. So that way, every single time that their family member walks into the room and sees that project, they can be hope-filled that they're coming home. And in that moment, that truth that I hit was when I said to him, I said, is hope a choice? And he said, Robyne, hope is a choice, and we make it every single day in the Canadian Armed Forces. That's what we do. We choose to be hope-filled. And I remember that moment realizing that was the truth. And going into each and every one of our work in our day, in our projects, in our companies and organizations, how often do we go in hope-filled versus going in almost crystal balling how we think that this is going to go without giving space for optimism and nurturing hope. So again, those are just a couple of the examples of my theory that we work with. But what I want to end with you, and it'll blow your mind how much, look how ambitious I thought I was to be able, that's good. One of the things I want to end with you is this practice of something that I call lighthouses. And this, again, as Peter left an experience and a gift for you, this is one that I want to share. And I have the deepest affinity to lighthouses. Wherever I go in the world, I always find the lighthouses, and I never knew why I was so attached to them. And I remember coming upon information from my family when we immigrated to Canada. And my grandfather had done a transatlantic voyage, and there were so many storms when he was crossing the Atlantic Ocean. He felt very scared. He felt very scared because of all the noise and all the storms, until he saw the lighthouse in Prince Edward Island. And when he saw the lighthouse in Prince Edward Island, he knew he was going to be safe. So my question for us is, where do we put beacons of direction and focus, and like what Ron talked about in terms of making sure that we know what we're looking at, where do we put that focus? And for me, I was very fortunate because where I've developed this practice, where for me, my lighthouse that I use every day to help ground my work and ground my family is this idea of the belief that I can do hard things. I believe in my bones that I can do hard. And I grew up with a mama ever since I was little who used to say things like, Robyne does hard things. And I remember having no idea what that meant. And I went to elementary school one day, and the teacher said, boys and girls, we're going to do something really hard. We're going to learn mathematics. And everybody recoiled. And I stood up and said, it's okay, I got you. I do hard. What do you need them to learn? I'll do it. Like, just let me know. And the teacher said, sit back down. And so I sat back down. But I realized in that moment, it was my first encounter with the world that people didn't like hard. Why did we decide, and when did we decide we don't like hard work? When did we decide that? From an evolutionary perspective, we have been hard workers since the beginning of time. Why is it just recently, in the last few decades, are we looking for hacks, easy ways, simplification? Like, we do hard, and we do it every single day. It's in your ancestry. That is actually what we're called upon to be able to do. And why this was so relevant for me is when I was 16 years old, I was a brand new driver, and I just got my driver's license, and I was having a real hard time in my social life and my family system. Like, I was really struggling. I had dropped out of school. I was no good at school. And I had an event that happened. And what happened was I was a brand new driver. I was driving home, and a storm rolled in really quickly. And my family had just moved to a new area, and I wasn't familiar with the topography. Within seconds, this storm created a whiteout, and I lost control of my vehicle, and my vehicle went shooting off an embankment, and it crashed through the ice, and it sunk in the Otonabee River. And within seconds, my entire vehicle was submerged in water. And I was very mindful that I was going to die. And the feeling I actually was struggling with was not the fact that I was going to die. It was the fact partly that I was angry that I was going to be separated from my mom, because my mom was so important to me, and I couldn't protect my mom for this outcome. I couldn't protect her from having a daughter who died in a car accident like this. And as soon as I started to think about my mom, I was thinking that she would say, figure it out, Robyne does hard things. And I made that decision in that moment to try. And it was February. I remember taking off my winter boots and my winter coat and my scarf and all of these layers. And I remember kind of trying to wiggle out the seatbelt. The pressure in the car was so great, I couldn't actually get the seatbelt to remove. I ended up in the cavity of the car and I had nothing to break the windows with. So I ended up breaking the windows with my hands. And I swam through the broken window. And at this point, the vehicle was about 20 feet underwater. It was midnight and I had no idea which way was up or down. And I made the decision to let go of my last breath because I knew my bubbles would rise, and I followed my bubbles to the surface of the water. And I remember getting what I thought was close to the surface, and all of a sudden feeling this shearing pain, and I realized my face had hit the ice because the river was frozen over. But I persisted and I kept trying, and I was able to get to the middle of the water where I was able to get my brake out of a small area of ice, and I got my torso onto an ice shield. And a man by the name of Joseph Todd was just a random guy driving home from shift work in his 30s. He had seen my car tracks go into the river, and he drove kilometers down the river to see if he could see anybody. He saw me out on the ice. He crawled out onto the ice. He had brought a chain with him. He wrapped it around my body and he dragged me back to the shore. He was awarded the Governor General's Award for bravery for risking his life to save a stranger. And when I woke up from the hospital, my mom was there. And the first thing my little mom said to me, she said, "Robyne, everyone wants to know, how did you do that?" And I'm like, "Mama, you taught me I could do hard things." She's like, "That is not what we talked about." That is not it. But one of the things that I've come upon in reflection of my work, that was my origin story. That was my genesis story, why I became deeply devoted to care about how people navigate challenge, stress, change, because I believe each and every one of us is capable of doing extraordinary when you are called upon. There is nothing special about people who are able to do extraordinary things, navigate challenge, handle difficult times. It all comes down to tools and skills that people already have. You are very well equipped. And so when I think about that experience, when I think about the work and what I can offer groups and people that I have the privilege of working with, is helping people pull that out, seeing what they're capable of, being able to put that into language so they can understand that they are very well equipped to navigate whatever life is going to throw at them. And lastly, I think one of the things that I would hope, if you take one takeaway from my particular talk today, is this idea that failure and mistakes are events. They are not characteristics. They are simply things that have happened to us that contribute to a story that deep down we are all interconnected, and each and every one of us are doing the best that we can to try and make what matters most matter most. So thank you, miigwech, merci, and I wish you all the best. So thank you.